Hey, Pat. I'm so honored to join all of you in the We Are Americans commemoration of the 80th anniversary of repealing the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. But there's another auspicious thing that we are commemorating, which is the 125th anniversary of the Supreme Court decision on birthright citizenship. So I want to thank the 1882 Foundation Executive Director, Ted Gong, the entire 1882 Foundation team, and all of today's event partners, including United Chinese Americans, Chinese American Citizens Alliance, OCA Asian Pacific American Advocates, the Japanese American Citizens League, AARP, and of course, the Library of Congress. Thank you for making this event possible. Well, it was back in 2010, just after I was elected to Congress, when a group of national Chinese American community organizations came to me, including Ted Gong, including Haipei Xu, yes, and others, and they came to say this to me. They said, Judy, the Chinese Exclusion Act is amongst the most discriminatory acts ever passed by Congress. It remains the only law to name an ethnic group for exclusion from immigration. It prohibited Chinese Americans from becoming naturalized citizens so that they could not vote. It required Chinese people to carry papers on them at all times or else be subject to deportation, and only the testimony of a white person could save them. This law deprived the Chinese American community of their civil rights for 60 long years, making them second-class citizens through the laws of this country. Yet, the U.S. had never apologized for it. And so, they asked this group of Chinese American leaders, will you lead the effort for an apology? And after I heard their passionate pleas, I said, yes, I have to do that. So for 2 years, we built a support network for a formal apology, and that included calling on them to meet with their Congress members in the district, many of whom, I can tell you this, had never ever heard of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. But finally, we got the support that we needed, and in 2011 and 2012, first the United States Senate and then the House of Representatives unanimously passed my bill expressing regret for the Chinese Exclusion Act. This year, I am proud to announce that I will soon introduce the official congressional resolution to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. As the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress, I will always use my seat at the table to ensure that our history is remembered so that things like this will not happen again. Likewise, we are gathered here to remember another turning point for our communities. In 1895, 24-year-old Wong Kim Ark returned home to San Francisco after a visit to China. He carried documents attesting to his identity and legal status as a U.S. citizen born on American soil. But the customs officers rejected Wong's status, asserting that because his parents weren't naturalized, he was ineligible for birthright citizenship. Citing the Chinese Exclusion Act, the officer ordered Wong deported. But you know what? Wong stood up for his rights, and he fought it. He was detained on a series of steamships off the coast of San Francisco, but he mounted a legal challenge from there. His case eventually reached the Supreme Court, and on March 28, 1898, the Supreme Court ruled in his favor by upholding the bedrock American principle that every individual born in the U.S. is an American citizen. So every American over the past 125 years has benefited from Wong's bravery. He affirmed our rights as citizens and helped to ensure that our nation would become a more diverse and inclusive country. So, while we celebrate these milestones, we know that we still have work to do. We know that anti-China sentiment and rhetoric have been on the rise. From proposals that target and profile Chinese researchers and scientists to new alien land laws that seek to limit the property ownership rights of Chinese immigrants, U.S.-China tensions have resulted in a sharp increase in policies that harm our communities here at home. In fact, we are currently pushing back on many provisions that seek to restrict land ownership for Chinese immigrant communities across various states and in Congress. These types of land laws harken back to the Chinese Exclusion Act era. And in fact, in the early 1900s, these exclusion acts then spread to stopping Japanese Americans, Korean Americans, of course Chinese Americans, some Asian Americans, from being able to own their own land. And in some states like Florida, where these laws were proposed, yes, they were actually able to get it signed into law by Governor Ron DeSantis. Now, let me give you an example of who this law could harm. And in fact, it did harm Mr. Jiming Shu, a political asylee living in Florida, who was persecuted by the Chinese government because of his activities, and he had to flee to the U.S., and he settled on Florida, where he lived for 4 years. Because of this new Florida land law, Mr. Shu was forced to cancel the contract for the purchase of what was supposed to be his new home and lost both that property as well as his $30,000 deposit. And by the end of this month, Chinese nationals who already own property will be required to register their homes as businesses, like they are on some kind of targeted list. How could we let that happen? We cannot let history repeat itself. So that is why our caucus is currently negotiating to keep these kinds of harmful land ownership provisions out of all major legislation. I also recently joined Congressmember Al Green to introduce a bill, the Preemption of Real Property Discrimination Act, to prohibit on the federal level such state laws from taking effect. We must learn from the wrongs of the Chinese Exclusion Act and other chapters in our nation's history and push back against racist or xenophobic policies that will damage our communities again. With 21 NHPI, or Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander members in the 118th Congress, the highest number in history, our growing voice is one that cannot and will not be ignored. So as we celebrate 80 years since the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act and 125 years since the landmark Supreme Court decision on birthright citizenship, we must learn from history, we must look forward, and we must strengthen our voices. And as we do so, we must reach out to stand with our allies and other communities of color who can understand the commonality of our struggles. We must lock arms and unequivocally say, end the xenophobic policies and rhetoric that puts lives in danger. Well, we were thrilled when President Biden signed into law the bill to study the creation of the National Museum of Asian Pacific American History and Culture, the first step in a process to create our very own Smithsonian Museum right here in Washington, D.C., so that we can teach all Americans that AAPI history is American history. We continue to support efforts to teach our community's histories in schools across the nation to ensure that children learn about our contributions and our history, such as the Chinese Exclusion Act and the bravery of Wong Kim Ark. So thank you for hosting this event. While we look ahead to the next milestone, I look forward to continuing our work together to ensure that our community's rights are protected. Thank you for all of your work on behalf of AA and HBI communities, and thank you for inviting me here today.
Originally, we were going to have a toast at this moment with some really nice wine provided by Paul. Maybe, where's Paul? Yeah, Paul. Come on up. Paul is a paper sounds from your part now. Your part of this country. And he has a wine in Napa Valley. That is actually where some of the original vineyards and the caves and so forth that stored the wine was built by Chinese. We tend to and we tend to think of just gold mining or railroad, but I did want to present to you a bottle of this wine with this label, which is Jake Lee's painting. Made in 1800, early 1900s, of Chinese breeding wine. So, if you don't mind, I'm just going to present it to you. Later on, what I'd like to do is have everybody take a toast, since we have some rules against wine and so forth. We're going to all go there and get some tea or coffee. But I did want to present you with this.